17 days after the funeral, my son called it practical. I called it my name on the title, and I let the rules answer. The porch light clicked on by itself at dusk, steady as it had for decades. The house had learned my quiet long before anyone suggested managing it. I folded the mail on the kitchen table and wrote today's date in blue ink. Mark arrived with a printed checklist that smelled like toner and urgency. Laura stood beside him with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mom, we need to be practical," he said, like the word could carry a household on its back. I took a breath, nodded once, and let him lay the paper flat where the wood still showed a ring from his father's last coffee. The list had boxes for things I could name in my sleep. Car, utilities, home insurance, smart lock, banking access. He tapped next to Toyota Camry and said, "It's just sitting there. We should sell it this week." I looked past him to the driveway, where the hood still caught the afternoon like a mirror. Laura slid a folder from her tote and spoke softly. "We can move your auto pay to our card for now. Keep things simple, Evelyn." She meant well, or told herself she did. I watched the words, "keep things simple," land on my table and rearranged nothing. I did not argue. Arguing is a wind that knocks over what you still need to carry. I asked for a pen and circled the items he had underlined. Then I wrote a clean sentence beneath his blocks of text. "Owner consents to nothing decided in this meeting." Mark frowned, but he did not erase it. You cannot erase ink once it has told the truth. He moved to the front door with the checklist in his hand. "The locksmith said he can switch you to a keypad tonight," he said. Laura brightened and reached for her phone. I looked at the brass lock that has turned beneath my palm since we bought the place. "No," I said, calm and final. "We are not changing locks today." The sentence did its work without raising its voice. When they left, the house breathed differently. I washed 2 coffee cups and a single spoon. The spoon was his favorite, a small one with a nick in the handle, and I let the memory come and go like a tide that respects the shore. After the dishes, I took my sweater and walked to the garage. The air smelled like oil, cardboard, and cedar, same as always. The Camry waited where he always parked, 2 squares from the water heater. I opened the driver's door and pulled the glove box like a drawer I had opened 100 times for maps and receipts. The letter lay where he said it would, tucked behind the registration in an envelope with my name in his careful hand. My hands did not shake, though my breath did once. I read standing there, with the light humming, the concrete holding steady under my shoes. He kept it brief, as he did when it mattered. He wrote that grief makes people rush, and rushing breaks what should be set slowly. He wrote that the title still read my name, that any old authorizations expired with his life, and that kindness was a better wall than a loud voice. "Kind rules keep us safe," he wrote, then underlined it once. I placed the letter back in the envelope and slid it into my sweater pocket. Then I pulled a small notebook from the glove box and made a list of my own. Bank, HOA, insurance, dealer policies, keys, visits. No opinions in the margins, just tasks that would steady the week. I closed the car and turned off the light, hearing the switch click like a metronome returning to the downbeat. The next morning, I walked to the kitchen, with the sun still low on the fence. I made oatmeal, black tea, and a quiet seat at the table. Then I called the bank and spoke to Mr. Alvarez, who has the careful voice of someone trained for storms. I gave my name, the last 4 digits, and the date the auto pay began. He asked why I wanted changes, and I told him the truth in 1 line. Circumstances changed. I will manage my own accounts. He paused, then read a policy that said what I needed. He said he would send written confirmation by mail and email. We both thanked each other and hung up as if setting down a fragile glass. I printed the bank email and placed it in a clear sleeve. Paper does not blink or roll its eyes. Paper remembers without telling stories. Then I wrote a second email with the subject, Household Boundaries, and sent it to Mark and Laura. 4 points. Keys stay with the owner. Visits by arrangement, not assumption. No sales or listings without owner signature. All decisions follow written confirmations from the proper offices. I used short sentences and the kind of words that do not wobble. At noon, I walked to the hardware store because some errands deserved to be done in person. The bell over the door gave one good chime, and the place smelled like rope, soil, and winter salt. "Afternoon, Miss Evelyn," said Joe from behind the register, where a jar of carpenter's pencils sat like a bouquet. I asked for 3 brass key blanks and a small lockbox for spare keys. He cut the keys while I read the instructions on the box twice, then once more for comfort. On the way home, I stopped at the Baptist church office and left a pie for Pastor Jim. He walked me to the porch and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the parking lot like it had something wise to say. "Some lines are fences," he said, gentle as the shade. "Some are handrails." I nodded and thought of the letter in my pocket. A kind rule is a handrail, I thought, steady when you reach for it in the dark. By late afternoon, I had written 3 more short notes. One to the HOA about open house signs and driveway use. One to the insurance agent confirming I was the sole named insured and that no changes were authorized without me. One to myself, reminding me to breathe before I answered any call that announced itself with urgency. I placed the notes in a blue folder and put the folder in the drawer that sticks a little because the small resistance helps me notice what I am doing. Mark called in the early evening. He did not ask about my day. "Did you see my text about the car?" he said, the words crowding each other at the door. I told him I had seen it. He said a dealer offered a fast cash price and could pick it up by Friday. I said the owner had not consented to sell. He went quiet the way a room does when someone pulls the plug. "Mom, we are trying to help," he said. "We are trying to keep you from making mistakes." I did not tell him about all the mistakes his father and I made before we learned the rhythm of the place. I did not tell him that every adult learns by paying the bill themselves. I said, "I hear that you want to help." Then I read the 4 points from my email, as if reading the weather. Keys stay with the owner. Visits by arrangement. No listings or sales without my signature. We follow written confirmations. He exhaled into the phone like the line had become a mirror, and he did not like what he saw. Laura spoke from the background, her voice trimmed with sugar. "Evelyn, we can set a keypad lock for you, dear. Codes are easier." I thanked her and declined. I said I prefer a key that turns and a door that looks me in the eye. We ended the call without closing the matter. Not every conversation ends with a handshake, but you can still stand on your side of the fence. That night I made soup and ate half of it, then labeled the rest for tomorrow. The porch light came on again, patient as ever. I collected the day's pages and laid them in a neat pile on the table. Then I took the letter out of my sweater and read it one more time. It was not long. It did not need to be. It remembered what we had lived and asked me to keep the pace we trusted. The next day brought weather from the west and a reminder from the HOA. Mrs. Reed wrote with a firm kindness that has kept this street decent for years. She thanked me for asking about signs and said that any sale signs require prior approval, which no one had requested. She also asked whoever parked the silver SUV to avoid blocking the mailbox. I forwarded the email to Mark and Laura without adding anything. The rules spoke plainly, and my sentence could have only muddied them. The dealer called mid-morning and asked for the registered owner. I told him he had found her. He asked for my signature on a pickup authorization and a copy of the title. I said the car was not for sale at this time. He tried a friendly joke about freeing me from maintenance. I told him the Camry runs, the tires are good, and I prefer to keep what still serves me. We ended pleasantly. Sometimes you only need a policy, not a speech. Laura appeared at lunchtime with a casserole and a pin in her hair. She set the dish down and looked at the mail like it had failed an exam. "You didn't have to send that HOA note to Mark," she said. "It embarrassed him." I folded a dish towel and placed it over the hot handles. "He embarrassed himself," I said, still soft. "The rule just held the light." We stood in the kitchen with the steam rising between us and let the sentence cool the room. She asked if she could tidy the guest room and maybe the linen closet. I thanked her for the offer and said I would prefer to do those tasks myself. She said I was grieving and might feel better with a fresh space. I told her grief does not like strangers moving its drawers. She laughed once, not unkindly, and said we would talk later. I walked her to the door and locked it after she left, not out of fear, but out of habit that keeps the day in its lane. That evening I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and wrote 4 index cards with the most important sentences. Owner consents to nothing decided in hallway conversations. Keys stay with the owner. Appointments prevent assumptions. Kind rules keep us safe. I placed 1 card in my purse, 1 in the kitchen drawer, 1 by the front door, and 1 under the teapot. People carry photographs. I carry sentences that hold. On the 3rd day, Mark arrived unannounced and tried the knob. It held. He knocked, and I opened with the chain on. "Call next time," I said. "No heat in it." He lifted his hands in protest and smiled in that way people do when they think charm is a master key. "Mom, we brought forms to help you," he said, holding a clipboard like a ticket out of trouble. I unlatched the chain, let him in, and set the clipboard on the table without looking at the lines. He wanted me to sign a temporary management agreement for the house and car. I read the first paragraph twice, then read the signature block that placed my name under theirs. "No," I said, simple as a folded napkin. "I will not transfer management." He closed his eyes and inhaled as if the room had tilted. "This is for your safety," he said, lower now. "There are scams." I nodded and agreed that there are scams. Then I pointed at my own name on the mailbox, on the title, and on the utility bills. "This is also a way scams happen," I said, "when good intentions forget whose name pays." He sat down. Laura stood in the doorway and shifted her weight as if ready to walk out or lean in, depending on how the next sentence landed. I poured water for everyone and placed the glasses carefully without making the table a stage. I said I loved them. I said I welcomed visits. I said I would not be managed. Then I took a pen and wrote a sentence at the bottom of his form. "Owner declines. All decisions will be made by owner in writing after review." I signed my name to that sentence, not to his. The conversation did not explode. It deflated, which is another kind of mercy. They left with the clipboard and a casserole dish now empty. I washed it, dried it, and wrote tomorrow's date on a fresh page. The porch light clicked again, and the house returned to its familiar heartbeat. I placed the letter back in the drawer where I keep recipes, because some instructions feed you for more than one kind of hunger. On the 4th morning, a letter from the bank arrived with my name printed cleanly above the address. Inside, Mr. Alvarez confirmed the changes we discussed. No third-party access, no new auto pays without my signature, and a note that paper statements would resume for the next 3 months. I placed the letter in my blue folder and wrote a short line on an index card. Paper remembers. It joined the others by the kettle. That afternoon, a courteous email from Mrs. Reed at the HOA arrived. She had received 2 inquiries about placing a "for sale" sign in my yard. She reminded whoever asked that only the titled owner may request signage and that the request must be approved in advance. She closed by saying she hoped I was resting and that the neighborhood meal train remained available if I wanted it. I thanked her and declined the casseroles with a smile the screen could not see. Good neighbors are also handrails. I forwarded the HOA email to Mark and Laura without commentary. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated with a long message from Mark. The paragraphs had heat at their edges. He said I was making this difficult. He said I was stubbornly attached to the past. He said moving fast was love. I read the message twice and put the phone face down. I washed the breakfast bowls, wiped the table, and took a small walk up the block. The sky had the pale blue that looks like a promise if you don't ask too much of it. When I returned, I called him. "Son," I said, steady as a level on a workbench, "I am not a project. I am your mother." Silence, then a soft, "I know." I read him my 4 sentences again, the ones I had taped to the inside of a kitchen cabinet. I added one more. "You may be disappointed and still be respectful." He did not argue. He said he needed time. I said I did too. The next day, a dealership agent appeared at the curb while I clipped the roses. He stepped out with a smile tuned to friendly and a clipboard tuned to final. He said he was here to pick up the Camry and asked me where to sign. I told him the car was not for sale and that the titled owner, standing with pruning shears in hand, had not requested service. He blinked, checked his sheet, and made a call. After a minute, he apologized. "Policy says no pickup without the registered owner's written authorization," he said. "Looks like we don't have that." I thanked him for his time and offered him a bottle of water. He drove away slower than he had parked. Natural consequences do not shout. They return everyone to their lane. Later that week, Laura came by with a different kind of urgency. Her voice had the brittle shine people use when there is a crack underneath. "Mark is upset," she began, lowering her tone as if the walls could repeat her. "This is about your safety. We're afraid you'll be taken advantage of." I nodded and said scams were real. Then I pointed at the mail with my name and the title with my name and the blue folder with my name again. "This is how people get taken advantage of, too," I said, "when their name is treated like wallpaper." She looked down. Then she asked if she could help sort the linen closet after all. "Another day," I said. "Not today." By Sunday, the house had settled into a new rhythm. I went to church and sat in the pew where we always sat, second from the back because my husband liked to slip out and talk to the ushers after the benediction. Pastor Jim preached on the difference between walls and handrails. He said handrails are there when you reach in the dark. He said love that respects a boundary is stronger than love that knocks. After the service, I stood by the coffee urn and let 3 people hug me, then walked home beneath the steady sun. The following week, the first property tax notice arrived with the familiar seal. I set it beside my checkbook and filled the lines the way I always have. Habit is a quiet vote for yourself. I mailed it at the post office and told the clerk I wanted a receipt. He stamped it with a firm red square that looked like a small blessing. That afternoon, I invited my granddaughter Lily for tea. She is 12 and sees more than adults think she does. She sat at the table with her hands folded properly, then unfolded them to touch the index cards. "Grandpa's handwriting is nicer," she observed, smiling sideways. "Mine is neat when it wants to be," I said. We ate slices of apple and talked about her school project on community gardens. When she finished her tea, I opened the recipe drawer and took out the envelope with her grandfather's letter. I did not show it to her. I only touched it and told her a sentence from it. "Kind rules keep us safe." She nodded like she knew already. That evening, I drafted one more email. I sent it to Mark and Laura and titled it "The Next Year." In 3 short paragraphs, I explained that I would not sell the house or the car for 12 months. I wrote that grief is not a rush job and that some foundations should be checked before anyone reaches for a sledgehammer. I said I would revisit decisions after the first anniversary with a clear head and a clean file. I invited them to join me each month for breakfast, pancakes on the first Saturday, so no one would wonder where we stood. I pressed send and turned off the lamp. The first Saturday arrived with the smell of coffee and butter. I flipped pancakes while the radio murmured the weather. Mark came on time and stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure the rules were different now. They were not. They were just visible. We ate in a comfortable quiet and then talked about Lily's garden. He mentioned the Camry once and then changed course on his own. Before he left, he looked at the wedding picture on the shelf and touched the frame with 2 fingers. "I miss him," he said. "I do too," I answered. We stood in that sentence until it felt safe to move. A week later, a small crisis visited and taught its lesson. Mark had called a contractor about updating my porch without asking me. 2 men showed up with a measuring tape and a cheerful quote. I told them no work could begin without a signed approval and a city permit posted at the site. They nodded and left business cards shaped like promises. That evening, Mrs. Reed forwarded me a note from the contractor asking about debris placement, and she reminded him that all exterior changes require advance review. "Thank you," I wrote back. "We will follow the process." The porch kept its steady boards. Respect, like lumber, is graded. In the quieter days that followed, I did something else that had waited politely in my mind. I set up a small scholarship at the community center in my husband's name for kids who needed help with shop class fees or tools. $50 per award, nothing grand, but enough to put a real wrench in a real hand. I told no one except Lily, who insisted on writing the first note to go with the first gift. She used her neatest handwriting without being asked. That Saturday, Mark brought flowers and an apology. It came out crooked at first, then found the straight line. "I thought speed was love," he said. "I thought doing everything was the same as being a good son." I poured him coffee and slid a plate across. "You do not have to move my life to prove you care," I said. He looked at the index cards by the kettle and laughed once. Soft. "Do I get one of those?" he asked. I handed him the extra card I had made. It read, "Help asked for is help that holds." We started meeting a friendlier rhythm. He texted before he came. Laura learned to ask instead of arrange. I learned which offers to accept and which to decline gently. When Lily's garden won a small ribbon at the fair, Mark took the photo and sent it to me first. "She says your pancake Saturdays are better than any trophy," he wrote. I told him I would frame both. On the 11th month, I took the Camry for a tune-up. The mechanic said it was in fine shape. "Plenty of life left," he said, patting the hood like you pat an old dog that still knows the way home. I drove it to the park, sat on the bench by the pond, and read my husband's letter again. The paper had softened at the folds, and the underlined sentence still stood like a rail. "Kind rules keep us safe." It sounded less like a command and more like a blessing now. On the anniversary of his passing, Mark came over early, carrying a brown bag that smelled like bakery. We drove to the cemetery under the same pale blue that had kept company with me all year. At the grave, he took a breath and spoke to the stone in a voice I had not heard since he was small. "I almost sold Mom's car," he confessed, smiling at himself. "You would have told me to slow down." I answered for both of us. "We learned," I said. "All of us." Back at the house, after coffee and quiet, I opened the envelope one last time in front of my son. I read him the sentence we had both been living into without knowing. "Kind rules keep us safe." He closed his eyes and nodded. "Can we make one more?" he asked. I slid a blank card across the table. He wrote slowly, speaking the words as he formed them. Respect is a door you knock on, even when you have a key. He propped the card by the kettle, and we agreed to keep it there. A week later, I met with Mr. Alvarez for a routine review. We checked the accounts, confirmed beneficiaries, and made sure nothing had slipped in through any side door. He asked if I wanted to move anything, and I told him I wanted steady before fancy. He smiled and said, "Steady is good work." I left the bank and walked to the library where Maya had saved me the latest community newsletter. It listed the scholarship recipients and a photo of Lily smiling like a sunrise. I traced the caption with my finger and let the pride settle where grief once sat like a stone. Some evenings I still sit with the porch light coming on, counting the seconds between hums like a metronome for the heart. There are moments when loneliness pulls a chair to the table without asking. I let it sit. I pour it half a cup of tea. Then I stack my papers, wipe the counter, and stand up. The rules are not a cage. They are a way of remembering where love belongs so it can find you again. If you have adult children who mean well and step too far, you can argue until the air is bruised. Or you can write 4 sentences that hold. Keys stay with the owner. Visits by arrangement. No sales without the signature that matches the title. We follow written confirmations. Add the one that makes all of them gentle. Kind rules keep us safe. That is the handrail I hold when the hallway goes dim. That is how I honor the man who built this home with me and the boy who is still learning how to knock. This year taught me that steady is a kind of love. It does not announce itself. It shows up with pancakes on the first Saturday. It reads a letter twice. It keeps the car that still runs. It sets a scholarship that fits a hand. It knocks, even when it has a key. And when the porch light clicks on by itself at dusk, I answer the door of my own life with my name, my voice, and a rule that remembers our dignity.